Alrighty, let's go ahead and get started, shall we? We will be in Revelation chapter 13 tonight. Fight back a steez. Revelation chapter 13. So tonight we're going to talk about the dreaded beasts of Revelation, or the first two beasts of Revelation 13, and we'll talk about the mark of the beast and so forth there at the end of the chapter. But before we do that, let's kind of recap some stuff just to get our mind in the right place for Revelation 13. So it's popping again. I don't know why it's popping, but it's popping. We're going to have to turn that off, I guess. All right, so Revelation 13. Anytime, and well, let me rephrase that. Most of the time in the book of Revelation, the images that John uses are copied and pasted. So same image talks about the same thing for the most part, okay? So we've talked about the fact that the sea usually represents Rome as the country of Rome, right? And the earth usually represents the religions of the earth, okay? So keep that in mind, because as we go through Revelation 13, you're going to see two beasts. One is of the sea and one is of the earth, okay? Now, we need to separate the religions of Rome and Rome as a nation most of the time. But Revelation 13, we talk about the two kind of together, okay? So when he talks about the sea beast first in Revelation 13, we're going to talk a lot about the worship of emperor. And then at the end of chapter 13, well, verse 11 and following, we're going to talk about the earth, the religions of Rome, being the priests and so forth that are teaching the religions, okay? So, Revelation chapter 13, verse number 1. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea, so that's Rome again, with 10 horns and 7 heads. You might remember that we talked about the fact that Rome, at one point, after the death of Nero, they had 7 generals that took over Rome and started trying to, fight amongst themselves to become the emperor and so forth. And so most people believe that those 7 heads are the 7 generals that took over after, with 10 diadems on its horns, so that's crowns on its horns, and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast I saw was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. Okay, so let's back up. Revelation 13, verse number 1, we have the sea beast. If you go to Daniel chapter 2, we're going to go back and forth to Daniel a good bit tonight, so you want to keep your finger over there, or maybe put your ribbon or something in Daniel chapter 2. We're going to kind of go back and forth a little bit because he uses the images of Daniel pretty heavily in chapter 13. But Daniel chapter 2, verse number 7. Somebody get that for me. Daniel 2, verse 7. Why did I write Daniel 2:7? I wrote the wrong verse down, and I wrote it in my Bible. That is horrible, and I will have to figure out why I was writing that. Anyways, is it 7:2? Let's try that, because the next passage that I wrote in my Bible is Daniel chapter 7, verse 4. So I have a feeling you're right on that. Let's try that one. There we go. There it is. So I got to go back and switch that around. Okay, so he's going to use the vision of the 4 beasts in Daniel chapter 7 to talk about these beasts that he's mentioning in Revelation. Now, why do you think, I think we might have covered this a little bit, but why do you think John would use the images of the Old Testament apocalyptic books so much? Why do you think he's reusing images here if they don't mean the same thing as in Daniel, right? Because most of the time, if we see a cross-reference in our Bible, it's because it's talking about the same thing, right? Well, this is not necessarily talking about the same thing. So why do you think he would reuse images? Yeah, I think it's probably just to make it a little bit easier to understand. You know, the people that are studying the Old Testament, Christians that are trying to learn the combination, but also by this time, at the end of the first century, you have a pretty good mixture of Jewish Christians and pagan Christians, and so because of that, you kind of get a crossover. Somebody's going to be able to explain this to them. So he starts talking about these beasts. The beast of the sea, Daniel 7 verse 2, has 10 diadems, its horns, its blasphemous names on its head, and so forth. Now look at Daniel chapter 7 verse 4. Okay, Daniel chapter 7 verse 4. The first was like a lion. It has eagle's wings. And I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and had the mind of a man. The mind of the man was given to it. And behold, another beast, second one, like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth, between its teeth, and it was told to rise and devour much flesh. After this I looked, and behold, another like a leopard, 4 wings of a bird on its back, and the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, terrifying and dreadful, and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns. Behold, there came up among them another horn. Okay, so we talked about that when we went over Daniel chapter 7 on Sundays a few weeks ago. But back to Revelation chapter 13. Let's read this again. The first beast is like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's. Its mouth was like a lion. And to it the dragon gave his power, his throne, and great authority. So John takes all of the beasts of Daniel chapter 7 and combines them into one, right? Because, again, he's not talking about necessarily the exact same thing. In Daniel 7, he's referencing the coming of the Greek Empire. Okay, so he's referencing Alexander the Great is the one horn in verse number 8 that comes up among all the others, and the kingdoms that would come after Babylon. But in Revelation, he's trying to get across the picture that regardless of who is in charge, if it's Babylon, if it's Persia, Greece, Rome, America, so forth, it is very easy for people to become enamored with the state, okay? Especially in this world where you have the ideas like emperor worship and so forth. And so he's trying to get this picture across that regardless of what the emperor is, or regardless of what the government is, it can be the same thing. Now, in John's perspective, he's talking specifically about Rome, right? That Rome kind of embodies everything, but that goes for all, what he's about to say goes for basically all governments, all world powers, all empires and so forth, if they give in to what is the problem, which at the end of Revelation chapter 13, he's going to talk about the mark of the beast, and he's going to give pictures of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 that talks about the Antichrist, the spirit of Antichrist, right? We've talked about the spirit of Antichrist and there being a specific one individual that becomes Antichrist are two different things. The Bible talks about the idea that there are many Antichrists. John says that in his letters. It never gives the indication that there's going to be one singular person. We've talked about that. You know, I read a commentary a few weeks ago that was talking about how the new president of the United States was the Antichrist, and just happened to be Reagan. So across history, every world leader, the Pope, so forth, any person, I've seen that Billy Graham is the Antichrist, or that any major person that kind of leads a group of people is the Antichrist. But in Revelation 13, he's trying to talk about the idea that the government, that the empire becomes the point of worship, okay? And that makes it the Antichrist, or the spirit of Antichrist. Okay, so back to Revelation 13. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. Does anybody remember what is so special about Nero? Does anybody remember what did Nero do that is important to remember when we're studying Revelation? Does anybody remember? Do what? He was bad. He was real bad. He actually wasn't nearly as bad as the two guys that followed him, Vespasian and Domitian. And if you take the later date of Revelation, which we're looking at it in reference to the later date in AD 96, the emperor is Domitian, the emperor that really pushed the persecution of the Christians to the extent that Revelation is talking about is really Domitian. But anyways, Nero's the one that burned down Rome. Remember? You remember the old saying, Nero played his fiddle while Rome burnt? That isn't accurate, but it's the idea is accurate that Nero really didn't care. He's the one that burnt down Rome, and he blamed it on the Christians. But when the vast majority, I think it's something like 3/4 of the city of Rome burned under Nero's oversight in AD 67 or 68, one of the two. If you have 3/4 of the capital of the world burned down, what do you think is the mindset of the world at that point? You think they thought that Rome would succeed and Rome would rebuild and Rome would be another power for another 300 years? Probably not, right? Y'all remember what happened when it seemed as though our nation was burning down a few years ago on a specific day in the month of January. You remember everybody thought, the U.S. is over. It's going to explode. It's imploding on itself, and it kind of has. But nonetheless, the same kind of idea. That this mortal wound in Revelation 13, verse 3, I believe is talking about the burning of Rome. Now, this is 20 to 30 years after that. Okay? So if you look at Rome burns in AD 68, the Revelation is written in AD 96. You have almost 30 years, 28 years after the fact, and so it's healed. This seemingly mortal wound has healed. And so verse 4, they worshiped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast, and who can fight against it? Okay, so they worship the dragon. Who's the dragon in Revelation? Satan, right? Every single time Revelation talks about a dragon, it's talking about Satan. Okay, so they worship the dragon because he had given his authority to the beast. Who's the beast? Rome. And they worship the beast, so they're worshiping Rome, saying, who is like the beast, who's like Rome, and who can fight against it? Rome is so big and so powerful, nobody can ever fight against Rome, which is true, right? No one ever conquered Rome. Rome fell apart, and then the world empires that came after kind of just swept up the pieces and put them back together in some way, right? So that statement is true. No one could fight against Rome. No one ever did and succeeded. But they're worshiping Rome. Now, before Jesus is born, and during Jesus' life and the early parts of the church, you have all these pagan religions, right? So you have the Roman religion that has morphed into all of these different things. So you look at like Acts chapter 17, Paul on Mars Hill, right? Rome has embodied all of these little bitty pagan religions from all over the world, and they have kind of incorporated it into Greek mythology and Greek religion to the point that all these little gods that all these groups of people had all over the world kind of morph into the Roman religion, and then by the end of the first century, the Roman religion kind of morphs into the worship of Caesar, that Caesar is the best god, and he's the one that kind of oversees all the other gods. Well, it's probably because if you put your faith in fake gods, eventually you're going to realize that they aren't working for you, right? So the draw of paganism was that you are worshiping the earth or the trees or the rocks or the thunder or lightning or water or war or whatever. You're worshiping these things to try to help you in those things, right? So whenever you went to war, you would go to the god of war and you would give a sacrifice to that god. If you ever needed your crops to grow, you would go to the god of harvest and you would give a sacrifice to that god. If you wanted to have a child, you would go to the fertility goddess and you would sacrifice to her, and then hopefully she would give you a child, right? Well, eventually you're going to realize that doesn't work, and so your faith in the fake gods is going to start diminishing. And so it morphed into, well, if none of these gods are able to help us, then the Caesar is the one that helps us, right? If we need food, who gives it to us? Caesar. If we need to fight in war, who is the one that's in charge of the war? Caesar. And so he must be the preeminent God. He must be the one that's in charge, and he must be the one that we need to worship. So they started worshiping Caesar. That happened around the time of Jesus' birth. People started worshiping Caesar, but you get to after Nero, and Vespasian is the one that really started pushing Caesar worship, Domitian as well. And so by the time that the book of Revelation is written, people have kind of given way, and they aren't really worshiping all those other gods anymore. They're worshiping those other gods in reference to Caesar. Okay? And so verse 5, Revelation 13 verse 5. And the beast was given a mouth, uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. All right, my math people. If 7 is completeness and 6 means incomplete or destruction, okay, that's going to come into play at the end of Revelation 13 as well. 6 means incomplete or destruction. 7 times 6 is what? 42. Okay, so you have complete incompleteness. You have complete destruction. Okay? So Satan has allowed Rome to take the world into complete destruction. That's all John has tried to say in verses 1 through 5. That the destruction and the horrible things that we're seeing in the world is because Rome has been left in charge. Remember, John is writing Revelation about Rome. The ultimate fulfillment of Revelation is in the fall of Rome that happened about 350-ish years after Revelation is written. Maybe 400 years after Revelation is written. And so he's trying to say, Christians, listen, the only reason why we're here in this situation is because Satan has used Rome to destroy the world. Okay? So this isn't a prophecy of something that's going to happen in the future. He's just trying to get the picture across. And remember, the reason why he can't say that outright is because a Roman official might read this. And then he's going to figure out who had it, or who it was addressed to, or who it was going to next. And he's going to see that these people are not worshiping Caesar. They're not worshiping Rome. And so there's going to be problems, which is what he talks about next. Revelation chapter 13, verse 6. Somebody get 6 through 8 for me. Revelation 13, 6 through 8.
Over
All right, back up to verse number 6. He blasphemes against God, blasphemes against his name and his dwelling. What is the dwelling of God? Where does God live? Think about it carefully, okay? Where does God live? What is his dwelling place? In the Old Testament, what is the dwelling place of God? The temple or the tabernacle, right? So in the New Testament, what is the dwelling place of God? What's the New Testament equivalent of the temple or tabernacle? The church, right? Now, where is God? He's in heaven, okay? But his dwelling place, where he resides on earth, is in the church, okay? So let's read that verse with reference to that. It opened up its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his church, that is, those who dwell in heaven. So, the dwelling is the people who dwell in heaven. So it's the church, right? So the church is the people. Somebody get Philippians chapter 3, verse 20. Philippians chapter 3, verse 20, please. Philippians 3, verse 20. All right, and Ephesians 2:6 says, he raised us up with him and seated us with him in heavenly places. Now, are we in heaven right now? No, but it's figuratively speaking, right? Ephesians and Philippians are talking about the idea that the church is heaven on earth, or at least it should be, right? Okay, so back to Revelation 13. So the beast is blaspheming God, he's blaspheming the name of God, and he's blaspheming the church of God, and he's blaspheming those who dwell in heaven, so Christians. And it also was allowed to make war on the saints, there's the Christians again, and conquer them, and authority was given over every tribe and people, language and nation. And all who dwell on the earth will worship it, everyone whose name has not been written in the foundation of the before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. So, Rome is in charge of the entire world. And every person who is not a Christian is going to worship Rome, right? Now, why would they worship Rome? Well, at the end of the book, or end of the chapter, we're going to see that they were forced to. Really, in verse 11 and following, we're going to see that they were forced to. But also because they don't know any difference, right? They don't know the options that are out there, the two options at this time that are out there, follow Rome or follow Christ. And so he's saying all those people who live in the earth, who reside in all these languages and nations, they're worshiping the beast, they're worshiping Rome. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. What does that sound like? What does verse 9 remind you of? Do what? Yeah, Jesus says it, and there's also another time, specifically in Revelation, that it's mentioned a couple times. Do you remember when John says, if anyone has an ear to hear, let him hear what the Spirit says? Yeah, to the churches, right. So that's kind of a quick little reminder. What was Revelation 2 and 3 about? That even though you have congregations that have issues or have no issues, even though you have congregations that have completely given over to false doctrine, there's still congregations of the Lord's church, the Lord's body. And so because of that, they need to get it together. They need to repent of those things, change those things, and so forth. And so verse 9 is kind of like a little jab reminder. Verse 10, if anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword he must be slain. Here's a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. So this is a good picture of God's sovereignty. Why does God allow these things to happen? We don't know. Okay, so I was talking to somebody a few weeks ago. It wasn't a few weeks ago. It was a few days ago. I think it was like Saturday or Monday or something. And we were talking about the sovereignty of God. And so he was asking, why are there so many questions where we just say, well, we don't know, or we don't get to ask those questions, or so forth? Shouldn't we be able to answer those? Well, sometimes the concept of the sovereignty of God is used to be a crutch so that we don't have to answer questions that maybe we don't know, or maybe we don't have the interest in finding out the answers. But there are some questions that are just up to the sovereignty of God. Why does God allow people, why does God, verse 10, why does God allow people to be slain? Why does God command that people be slain? Or why does God allow people to fall away from him? The easiest thing for God to do is to say that everyone is saved and everyone will follow me. That is completely within his sovereignty to do so, but he decided not to for one reason or another. And we don't get to ask why that is, because the sovereignty of God is something that we need to understand as being above our thoughts, right? Isaiah says that his thoughts are far above our thoughts. Okay? So, here's a call to the endurance of the saints, because if you're supposed to be taken captive, you're going to be taken captive. If you're supposed to die, you're going to die. There's not a lot you can do about it, right? God is in control, and sometimes he allows horrible things to happen to people for one reason or another. Maybe for education, maybe for teaching or learning or so forth. Maybe, sometimes in the Old Testament and New Testament, God allows or causes horrible things to happen to cleanse his people, right? Ananias and Sapphira is a good example of that in the New Testament. All right, so that's the first beast. The first beast is Rome is getting people to follow the Caesar and worship the Caesar. And who is giving Rome that authority? Satan, right? Okay. God is allowing it to happen, but and he's giving the authority of Romans 13. He's given the authority of being the government to Rome, but just because God gives the authority to be the government does not mean that God gives the authority to use that in a way that leads people away from God. So same concept is, you have a preacher has authority to speak on behalf of God in the New Testament, but that doesn't mean that a preacher has that authority to then say whatever he wants to say. Right? Just because you've been given authority by God does not mean you get to use your authority for whatever you want. Just because God has given us the authority to make decisions and make our own faith choices does not mean that we have the authority to say, well, I made my decision, and so God has to meet me there, and God has to accept my decision. Just because we have the choice doesn't mean God has to accept our choices. All right, so let's go on. Revelation chapter 13, verse number 11. Let's look at this second beast that is the religions of the world more than Rome itself. Revelation 13, verse number 11. Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. Earth always talks about the religions of the world. It had two horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all authority of the first beast in its presence, makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. Okay, so if we're looking at the second beast with reference to the priests of Rome, the people that would encourage people to worship the Caesar, so not just the priests, but also the Roman officials, the Roman soldiers, anyone who is pushing people to worship the beast or the Caesar, okay? It exercises all authority of the first beast because it is part of the first beast in its presence. It makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast. Verse 13, it performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. Okay, so that's talking about a miracle, isn't it? Now, it's figurative, it's apocalyptic, okay, so keep that in mind. But also, is it possible that people could, I don't want to say fake miracles, but that people could use certain things and allow people to think certain ways so that they don't necessarily have to lie about it, but it's not necessarily true, and it makes people think that they're working miracles. Yeah, so the other day, Gus sent me a video of some, did you see the video too? Okay. Gus sent me a video of somebody running during a worship service. And he said, is that real? I think he sent it to me, or maybe he just mentioned it to me. And he said, is that real? And I said, oh yeah, it happens all the time. And I said, I've got DVDs in my office of it happening at the church where I grew up. People just take off running. Then I showed him a couple videos of people jumping in the baptistry or swinging their suit jackets around and so forth. And all of those people are not doing so because they want to fool people. They're doing it because they're misapplying emotionalism for what is thought to be a miracle, right? So the modern day speaking in tongues is just the misunderstanding of emotionalism, and they think it's a miracle when it's just emotionalism. They get controlled by their emotions, they get worked up, and so they just start speaking in ecstatic utterances. Or you have probably never seen this, which is probably a good thing, but people will. Has anybody ever heard of being slain in the Spirit? Anybody know what slain in the Spirit is? Dalen does. Okay. When you just fall over and convulse a little bit, that's being slain in the Spirit. It's not because they're trying to fake it. It's not because they're trying to trick people. It's because they've misunderstood and they're allowing their emotions to control them, right? They're not evil people. They just don't know any better, right? Well, same in Rome, okay? They had miracles that were thought to be miracles that really were just actions. They might have had a couple people that were faking it, that were trying to promote things. I think later on in the chapter he references that. What I believe he references that. But for the most part, these pretend miracles are being done in Rome, just like you remember. His name just left me. Yeah, Simon the sorcerer, but what's the... Elijah in the Old Testament. Those priests of Baal wholeheartedly believed that they were going to be able to send fire from heaven, right? They weren't trying to fake people. They genuinely believed it, to the point that they start cutting themselves because they think that Baal might listen to them if he sees that they're in pain, right? So they genuinely believed it. All right, so back to Revelation 13. These pretend miracles in verse 13, they might be the same as those heartfelt, false miracles. They might be something that someone is doing, in an attempt to kind of muddy the water or something like that. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 9 says, "The coming of the lawless one is like the activity of Satan with all power and false signs and wonders." He's talking about the quote-unquote Antichrist, or the concept that people would be against Christ. And if you look and you see that Jesus worked miracles, or that his apostles worked miracles, and then you see that someone else can work similar miracles, it dilutes the importance of Jesus, right? And so you could go and worship them. You have the 7 sons of Sceva that are casting out demons in Jesus' time and so forth. It dilutes the true miracles, which causes people to just follow whoever they see, right? Simon the sorcerer wanted the ability to speak in tongues because he thought that maybe he could make some money off of it, right? Well, how's he going to make money off of it? People follow him, and they'll give him his money, give him their money, right? All right, so back to Revelation. Verse 14 of Revelation 13. "And by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain." Okay. Here's the part where it comes in that there definitely were people charged by Rome to completely fake what was going on. So we know for certain that there were priests of Rome who were in charge of standing behind the statues. Have y'all ever seen a ventriloquist throw his voice? Y'all ever seen somebody do that in person? It's kind of tricky. It'll mess with your head. I'll be looking at like Dalen's a ventriloquist. I'm looking straight at him, but it sounds like somebody over here is speaking. And he's not moving his mouth. The one time it happened, it really messed with me. I could not, my brain just couldn't compute it. Okay, so they had people that would do that. They'd stand behind the statues, and they'd act like the statue was speaking. That it's a miracle that Caesar is speaking through his statue. Or they had statues that could move. You could manipulate it, and it could move, like a puppet almost, right? So you have people that are genuinely faking it, and then you have some that are just caught up in all of this, and they start attributing random things to miracles and so forth. And the whole purpose of all of this was Satan was using Rome to lead people away from God, so that he might speak and cause those who would not worship the king, the image of the beast, to be slain. Verse 15. Because if you didn't worship the beast, if you didn't worship Caesar, you died in one of two ways. Either there were certain times when Caesar would, either Nero, Vespasian, Domitian, so forth, they would, like what Nebuchadnezzar did in Daniel's day, they would decree that everyone on this time at this place is supposed to worship my image. And if you didn't, you were killed. So same concept as Daniel. And it's happened multiple times through history, outside of the biblical history as well. That if you don't worship what I tell you to worship, you're going to die. But there's a second way that you would die if you didn't worship the beast. And that comes in verse 16. It also causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or on the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast and the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. Okay, if 6 means destruction or incompleteness, 666, multiply it by however many that is, 111, it just means complete destruction, complete doom. And the idea is, without Jesus, if you're worshiping anything other than Jesus, you can't have completeness. You can't have the life that Jesus created you to live. Now, let's talk about the mark of the beast. There's a couple different ways of looking at this. We know for certain that there was some way that you would prove that you had done so. Okay? So in some places it would be a mark, or some places it would be something that you carried like a documentation or something else. It depended on where you lived to differentiate what that mark was. But you had to have some way to prove that you had worshipped the beast. There's one way of looking at it, which we know that is true. The second way of looking at it could have been, on their money, you had the image of Caesar, whoever the Caesar was at that time, right? Or the Roman official in that area. You know, we have coins with Pontius Pilate's face on it. He's not Caesar, but he's in charge of the area of Jerusalem. So it's two ways of looking at it. Either the mark of the beast is that documentation that proved that you had worshipped the beast, or it's with reference to the money. Okay, I tend to lean toward the documentation, because Christians, you can use money regardless of whose face is on it, right? Doesn't mean that you've worshipped Satan, or worshipped the Caesar, or worshipped. It doesn't mean that I've worshipped Abraham Lincoln if I use a dollar bill. Wait, no, who's on the dollar bill? George Washington. What bill is Lincoln on? The $5 bill. I like $5 better. Listen, barely know how to use money. Okay, so it doesn't mean that we've worshipped America if we use our coinage or our money, right? Same thing. So I tend to skew toward the mark of the beast is that documentation that had to be shown. And if you didn't have it, you couldn't buy or sell anything. So how do you die in the first century if you can't buy or sell anything? You can't eat, right? Now they were a lot more self-reliant than we are today, but they still needed certain things, right? They still needed to be able to buy things. They still need to be able to buy food and so forth, especially if they lived in cities and so forth. So I tend to skew toward that being the mark of the beast, but regardless of what you think, it is not some modern day RFID chip or whatever they're called. You know the chips on your cards? You know the little tap to pay chips? RFID. Some people say that's the mark of the beast. Some people say it's a tattoo we're all going to have to get. Or something else. It's not talking about modern day. Everything in Revelation 13 has pointed to the worship of Caesar in the Roman Empire. And everything in the book of Revelation has been fulfilled. And so we're not waiting on this mark of the beast to happen. Okay? Now, is it possible that we come to a point where we live in a country today, not America, but another country that forces people to worship the emperor or the king or the president or whoever? Yeah, the concept might be there for us to understand, but it's not literal, okay? And so we need to be careful to help people see that because, like we've talked about a number of times, Revelation is often used as a scare tactic to get people to believe what people want so that then they can have power or have money or something else, right? You look at the most prominent people who teach premillennialism, like the first one that really broke big is John Hagee. Y'all probably don't know who that is, or Billy Graham taught it a good bit. All these massive people, maybe not all of them, but a lot of them use it as a scare tactic to just try to get more followers, right? And that's not the point of Revelation. The point of Revelation was to not to scare them, but to encourage them, right? All right, so we'll pick up in Revelation 14 next week. Thank y'all very much. The kids are out there running around, so we'll hurry up and let them in. Thank y'all. Alrighty, let's go ahead and get started. I think we got everybody over here. What prayer requests do we have tonight? Rebecca is at home, full throttle sick. I mean, real sick. So y'all be praying for her. She woke up this morning just feeling awful, and she's continually felt worse and worse all day. So please be praying for her. Who else? Katie's traveling to school. Who else? Anybody else have any others? Yes, sir. Oh, no. Where was it? J.R. Allen? Oh, yeah, that's... Yeah. Yeah, definitely need to be praying for that. Yeah, for sure. Anybody else have any others? Alrighty. Guys, if I can have y'all stick around for just 5 seconds after worship, I need to ask y'all a question that someone asked of us today. So just we can just meet in the nursery or right here, wherever works best. Anything else? Oh, the Easter egg party is going to be not this Friday, but next Friday at the Sizemore's house at 6:30. All right, is that what you said? At 6:30. So plan on that. It's Wednesday night. So guys, if we can make sure that all the trash is taken out so that it doesn't overflow this weekend for Sunday. I think that's everything. Gary, do you have our invitation song picked out yet? Potluck Sunday. Oh, there we go. Yeah, I knew I was forgetting something. What was it? 9:24. I didn't do anything. Anyway, I guess. 9:24. If anybody needs to obey the gospel or repent of sins, now is a great time to do so. We're going to stand, and Gary will lead us in a song of encouragement. And then after that, Lenny, will you lead us in a closing prayer? Let's sing.
Father, as we come to you tonight at the close of this worship, we want to lift up those that were mentioned tonight that needs our prayers. Be with each one that was not able to make it here tonight for some reason or another, other work, sickness, or whatever it might be. Be with each of us as we leave here tonight, get us home safely, and bring us back Sunday at the next point of time. In your Son's name, amen.